Hello, welcome to episode 1 of Stardust Crusaders, analysis B.2. I don't know what to call this, it's bloody ridiculous. How about that time when Avdol tried to bully Jotaro and lived to regret it? Very dramatic, but if we want to be a bit more descriptive, it would actually be, here are the fundamentals of stand design, as much as I understand them. I'm just going to go as far as I can into talking about what is so cool about stands. And it will be difficult for new people to understand, the ideal JoJo viewer, as I keep calling them. And the ideal viewer, as I keep calling them, is also what I'm going to keep calling them for the rest of this entire analysis. I think stands are absolutely fascinating, and Stardust Crusaders, if there's one thing that makes Stardust Crusaders unbelievably good, it's the introduction of stands. Now, the sad thing is that Araki got really good with stands, even as early as the very next part. In fact, even as early as by the end of the part, right? You look at the Pet Shop versus Iggy fight, right? That's an amazing stand fight. You look at what he did with Vanilla Ice, and the final fight against Dio. All of those stand powers are used to their full capacity. They're not creative stands in and of themselves, but the way those fights play out are so full of the creativity that becomes the trademark of a stand fight. That makes you say, oh, this is what's so cool when two people bare their souls against one another to win, to achieve this ultimate success over this other person when both of them are bared right down to the very essence. And you have nothing else to lose, because when the stakes of the fights are such that you have your soul on the line, right? You're literally fighting with your souls, then your life was forfeit immediately as soon as the fight started. So literally there is nothing that you could do that is out of bounds, so to speak. That's what's cool about a stand fight. And by the end of the part, Araki has really learned to master those fundamentals. Unfortunately, when we are introduced to Avdol and to Star Platinum here in today's fight, we don't get that at all. We get only the barest possible hints at what will be there. So I intend to unpack it right out of the box so that you can, as you're watching the rest of Stardust Crusaders, you can decide for yourself whether a stand fight is a good stand fight or a bad stand fight on the merits of what a stand fight can actually be, instead of just, I like this, I didn't like this was kind of an ass pull, etc., which is very much how a new JoJo viewer will look at stands. And that's just not the level, that is just not the richness, the depth, the complexity that is native to stand fights in conception, and of course once the idea gets fleshed out by Araki, in actualization as well. Simply because we are talking about the basest expression of desire itself, and specifically the desire to win against this opponent. When two people who feel that way about each other, against each other, are pit against one another with a superpower that only they can even comprehend to some degrees, with which they can pull the rug out from under the opponents, from under the competition, how far will these two people go when every part of their being itself is affected into the real world? How much is required for them to triumph over their opponents? This is interesting as an idea, even if you're just looking at two random people, right? For example, these two these two jail guards standing in front of Jotaro's cell. If those two guys had stands, it would be an interesting fight. But it becomes truly ecstatic to watch when you're looking at characters who actually feel real, who actually feel like people, who have not only character traits, but have fears and hopes and have ambitions. Part 5 is my favorite for stand fights because of this, because all of those characters, the good guys and the bad guys, are so well written. You know what they want at any given time. They have all these little quirks that keep manifesting themselves, that keep changing the battlefield to their advantage, that keep trying to affect the world to their benefit, not only through their stands, but for the purposes of their stands. Like, think of all the times that someone has tried to move into a more advantageous position for their stand specifically, or it's the times that an opponent has forced someone out of a more advantageous position, like Green Day, for example, was the stand for that, right? Through the clever use of their stand. Another example that quickly comes to mind is White Album driving Giorno off of the bridge into the water, where, of course, he can freeze them very, very easily. The ideal JoJo viewer will have no idea what I'm talking about, but hopefully in time they will, and hopefully the fact that I can be so impassioned about stand battles is in inviting you to say, well, yeah, maybe there is something cool about these stand battles, and not judge them based on what we'll see in this first season of Stardust Crusaders, with very gimmicky stands that can be defeated in like an episode of jokey, unserious conflict between the opponent and the proponent. Now, of course, Araki knows some of these facets even as early as this Avdol fight, and you'll notice that some of the things he does are directly supporting the things that I've said. So, for example, this idea that stands are about two people, right? Two fully fleshed out characters. It's very often the case that the first stand battle of a part is between two characters who are both on the same side, or who end up on the same side eventually. Part 3 is a perfect example. Obviously, Avdol and Jotaro are both on the side of Joseph. Eventually, they both end up as Stardust Crusaders, and yet this first battle between them that fleshes out, yes, these characters, but also introduces what stand powers these guys have, is between these two future allies. In Part 4, the Jojo of that part has a stand battle with his nephew, whom he knows is allied with him, but nonetheless there is a testing of strengths between these two people and their stands, because, you know, these are real people. They will have anger. You can tell I've been learning German. They will be angry with each other for slights that relate to their personal characteristics. You know, you touch Jotaro's hat, you might get your ass whooped. You insult Josuke's hair, you will definitely get your ass whooped, right? You don't want to do these things because these are people, these are characters with their, like I said, their individual traits and their peculiar quirks, their bizarre behaviors. And their stands are the desire to affect themselves into the world, which means that sometimes it's as restrained as the person who is the owner of the stand, and sometimes it's as wild and reckless as someone who would get angry at his hair being insulted, right? So you get the full spectrum of what a human being is through how they interplay with their stand, and the easiest way to show that without making, you know, like a life or death situation right from the get-go of the part is by having a little bout, a friendly exhibition match with an NPC ally, if you will. So Avdol is the particular test dummy for Part 3 and the very first allied stand battle that we get to see. So let's see what Avdol's fight has in store for us. I don't really know what I'm going to say. I haven't really written notes. I just have a general love for stands, I guess, and a general idea of what it is about Avdol that makes Magician's Red interesting. The first thing, of course, that you'll notice is that he's a fire user, right? Magician's Red controls fire, which for Avdol is interesting because, you know, you think about Zuko from Last Airbender, you think about Hino Rei from Sailor Moon, right? That's Sailor Mars, who also controls fire. These are characters who are fiery, right? They're very emotional. They get angry very quickly. And that matches the temperament of fire quite well, right? Sort of classical elements style. If you're into zodiacs or whatever, I'm sure you'll have more information on that. I don't really care about that shit, but the general idea is still present, right? You can control fire because you are yourself a fiery person. Avdol is the opposite of that. Avdol seems to be someone who has tempered fire very, very well. He's a patient man. You know, he references the Aesop's fable where the wind challenges the sun to take off a man's coat, and the wind blows and blows and blows, but the man just pulls his coat tighter, and the sun just sort of patiently gloms, I can't think of a better verb, gloms all of his heat onto this man, and finally the man takes off his coat and the wind concedes defeat, is humbled. In the same way, Avdol is very patient with Jotaro, right? He doesn't accept victory straight away. He doesn't force victory straight away. Instead, he lets Jotaro step out on his own, which is not something you would expect from a fire user, right? So immediately we see this contrast with who Avdol is and what he seems to be. And this idea of seeming, we talked about it in the first analysis video as well, where a lot of Stardust Crusaders is about things not seeming as they ought to be, right? A Jojo in Jotaro is not seeming as a Joestar, even though he carries that bloodline. The evil spirit is not an evil spirit, though it is seeming to be. And our third example here is Avdol, despite seeming to be quite rash and quite brutal, is actually a very patient man and one who is willing to test his mettle against others very carefully. He knows his strengths well, but he isn't willing to immediately push past them. Jotaro, for example, challenges him with the pointy stick. Pointed stick? And Abdul says this, petty thing, I could melt that. Magician's Red could melt that in an instant. So he isn't prideful enough to put down Jotaro. He just does the job. This is the cool thing about stands, because we can immediately assume that this is who the character is. This is the fundamental trait of who this character is. If we see a stand that is brutal and cold-blooded and violent in conception and in style, then we know it is the stand of a violent, brutal, cold-blooded man. Or woman, as it might be. No sexism here. I appreciate that women can be cold-blooded, violent, brutal murderers as well. Hooray for gender equality. And here's the great thing about JoJo, because we have this guarantee from Araki himself that this is what stands are. They are the soul, no matter what you see on the page, or on the screen as it is if you're watching the anime. This is who the character is truly. There's no two ways about this. This is something that is interesting about Superman and sort of spin-off inversions of the Superman idea. For example, Homelander from that, I forget the name of the show. The Boys? Is that what it's called? That's a fucking shit name, but whatever. I'm sure you guys will recognize who I'm talking about. Homelander is this character who's sort of a mix between Captain America and Superman. He has basically all of Superman's powers, but he has this sort of nationalistic side where he wears the American flag as a cape and all that as well. But the problem with that is Homelander is also completely twisted and essentially psychopathic. He has no sense of morality whatsoever, and he will happily kill people for his personal benefits or even for his personal enjoyment. So he is Superman in power, but not in anything else. And essentially what the writers of Superman, and therefore of Homelander, are also saying is that power ought to go to those who are just. Because when it doesn't, you will have such you as in the person who has the power, you will have such a rush of tyrannical thrill from having this power over other human beings that no one will be able to withhold you from, that you will destroy essentially your own humanity and the lives of many other people besides. Now, JoJo says something different. JoJo says, mate, you already have the power. You're a human being. You have always had the power. Sure, to help others, as Superman does, but also to tyrannize others. The fact you have a soul, the fact that you can affect yourself into the world is all you need to wreak havoc, right? And it's in a sense, it's a very empowering story that JoJo is telling, because it's basically saying it doesn't matter who you are. You have a soul, you have your power, you can do whatever you want as long as you desire it greatly enough. But on the other hand, that's also a very terrifying claim, because it means, well, anyone can do whatever they want to you, right? Therein lies the core conflict of any stand battle. It is simply the distance between what two people want from each other. And that distance is only gauged by, well, what they want, right? Where do their desires come from? Where does their morality lie? Now, to finish the thought with Homelander and Superman, because I didn't quite finish that thought, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the time, the morality of a character in these shows is defined by what he does, right? It's defined by whether he chooses to save a plane full of people or whether he doesn't, whether he chooses to kill someone because they annoy him or whether they simply talk with each other and chat it down. The idea is that the power is a conduit for who the person is inside. Not with JoJo, though. This is the point that I'm really trying to hammer home, is that in JoJo, it is the morality itself that takes center stage, that becomes the focus and the driving force of that power. Without a core philosophy that forces you and drives you to fight in many ways, you won't even have a stand power. It's not a case of, oh, if you had laser eyes and if you could fly and etc., would you do this? No, it's because I want to do this, I have these powers, right? It's inverted. The desires come first, not the powers. And that's where JoJo's stand fights become so much more thrilling. They recenter the fight away from the special effects, right? The zoom and the kablam and whatever. It uses all of those the way they're supposed to be used as effects, right? There's sort of additional stuff that don't really play a key role in the story because the story is itself what these two people want and who's gonna get what they want. And because of that, stands are unbeatable. There are a lot of stand cognate examples from other anime and manga, most of whom have stolen from JoJo. A couple of quick examples is My Hero Academia is very popular lately, but it has the same problem as Homelander. I shouldn't say problem because it's not a problem, it's just a difference from JoJo. Just bear with me for a second here. It has the same problem as Homelander, wherein it says that powers are more like words or more like communication in that they are a secondary expression of what you want and not the primary result of wanting in the first place, right? To want is what gives you the power to get it. That's what the stand idea is, and My Hero Academia doesn't have that. Same thing with Nen powers from Hunter x Hunter. Because those powers don't come from the soul, because they are first constructed by the Nen user, which in its own way is a very interesting idea, but it's flawed in the same way in that they are not wished into existence by the act of wishing itself. Right? Instead, they are constructed. It's more an act of self-analysis, if you will. You know, Gon has to say, what am I interested in? Oh, rock, paper, scissors. Instead of, who am I and what do I want? Bam! Star Platinum comes out, you know. Who is Avdol? What does he want? Bam! Magician's Red comes out. You don't get that sort of immediate connection to this character. And that's why stands are so cool. Okay, I ranted for 20 minutes without even pressing play on this video, so let me do that now, and we'll just have a fun time talking about Magician's Red, shall we? The other thing about Magician's Red visual design, besides the flame, is also this eagle head. Most of the stands that we see usually have weird, more robotic heads. It's weird to see a purely organic stand, and it's even weirder to see a non-human-esque stand, right? Normally stands have a face of some kind if they don't look outright robotic. A human face, that is. We don't usually see an eagle head or whatever that is, a falcon or a turkey. I'm not just going to keep guessing birds, but essentially it's sort of a bird of prey. And we get to see more of Avdol's character. Again, the really cool thing about this being a visual medium, and also the fact that it represents a soul, is every little detail that Araki put into Magician's Red, into Star Platinum, into every stand is essentially saying, here's a little bit more of Avdol's soul that you can just peer at and try and figure out what's going on. So with this bird, for example, we can suggest that it is some legacy of his Egyptian heritage. The Egyptians, of course, worshipped the falcon as Horus. I don't know if this is a falcon. I would say it's more like a phoenix, considering the fact that he's wreathed in fire. That seems much more apt. And for various plot details and more character development, I think a phoenix is also very appropriate for who Avdol is as a person. Now, in contrast to this, because I guess JoJo just likes to challenge everything I say, in contrast to all this is Star Platinum, who his power is not actually revealed in this interplay, right? Normally, stands have some sort of effect that they can do. Avdol can create and control fire, spiritual fire that normal people can't see. Hermit Purple, as we see later, can create spirit photos through 3,000 yen cameras that he has to smash every single time. But Jotaro doesn't seem to have a power. Now that's something that is really interesting that won't get resolved until very near to the end of the show, where it is explained a bit better what's going on with Jotaro's stand. But for now, there is this element of, okay, if there's all this detail that's gone into stand design, and if this is all what stands are about, then how is it that Star Platinum, the stand, the soul of our protagonist, is somehow the most bland, the least detailed, the least that we can derive from? Surely if he's the protagonist, then we should be able to tell at a glance who this person is and why we ought to care about his journey. But this goes back to what I was talking about in the previous analysis, which is, this is not a journey for Jotaro's sake. This is a journey for the sake of the Joestars as a family, right? To analyze Jotaro as an independent character, I think doesn't do that justice. It sort of backbites. That's not the word I was looking for. Is that even a word? I don't think so. Let's think up different verbs. it backfires. That's probably what I was going for. It backfires against Araki. It backfires against the story. If we think of it as a Jotaro versus Dio story, the way that, for example, part 2 was Joseph versus the Pillar Men, or part 1 was Jonathan versus Dio. This isn't Jotaro versus Dio. This is the Joestars versus Dio. Does that really excuse the fact that Star Platinum doesn't have any particularly well-defining traits? Not really. Does it excuse the fact that he doesn't actually have a meaningful power? Not really. But then again, we have to assume that this was Araki's very first stand he ever made. Possibly. And he hadn't even fully considered the idea that stands ought to have powers when he decided to draw Star Platinum for Jotaro. We see in this very same episode that Jotaro is himself looking up the definition of occult and the books, the various books that he has. You'll see the manga panel here. It says extrasensory perception. And all of these different facets of what his stand is allowing him to do, you have to wonder whether Araki, again, is still trying to figure this out as he's writing the story, that Jotaro would have this sort of ESP power, or if this resolution that is finally given to Star Platinum near the end is actually what he had planned all along. If we are gonna talk about stands, I think it's interesting to talk about this idea that only stand users can see stands. Because right from the get-go, when Holly first talks to Joseph about this evil spirit, Joseph realizes, oh, Holly can see this, which means she probably has a stand, but she hasn't manifested it yet, which is a nice little bit of foreshadowing, but also it suggests that something is wrong with Holly. And we'll talk about what is wrong with Holly. Something is flawed with Holly as a character. And it has to go back to the nature of stands. I'm not going to talk about it yet because obviously it's going to be a big plot detail when we get there. But, you know, there is also this idea that only stand users can see stands, which maybe is worth talking about. I think the interest in that point lies, once again, in this idea that stand battles are about the distance between how much two people want something. Which means another person's stand is only relevant to you, that is, it's only visible, so to speak. It only manifests itself and makes itself an obstacle to you when it is against you. But the vast majority of people are not so selfish, let's say, or so self-desirous that they will want to harm other people or get into other people's way just to get what they want. You'd have to be an exceptional person or want something exceptionally to an exceptional amount in order to manifest a stand. I guess we'll talk about that more when we get to part 4 and Kira Yoshikage. But until then, that's just a nice little foundational point about stands that also needs to be established. And it's an interesting idea all the same. Anyway, by and large, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. I guess I'll wrap this up with just some visual points that I wanted to talk about, mainly how beautiful this fucking show can look sometimes. I'm not a great fan of the Part 3 anime style. I think the coloring is so flat and not exciting, but sometimes they just knock it out of the park, especially with those thick black lines that they use to draw close-ups of some of the characters. It just looks so gorgeous. Jotaro looks beautiful here. Holly looks gorgeous here. You can do this with a bunch of frames. Not to mention the fight itself is so smoothly animated. They have this beautiful establishing shot and then the table kick in order to do that. That's an interesting point about stand design, by the way. I was talking about how you can use the environment to your advantage. That is about like 70% of what a stand battle is about. It's not just how you use your stand, but it's like this complicated formula that just keeps adding and adding of where is your opponent, who is your opponent, what are their powers, where are you, what can you do, do you have any allies that you can possibly turn to or bring your enemy towards? It's just like so many mind games built on top of each other. And this initial moment of him sort of exploding the toilet in order to release, admittedly, a little bit of water that Magician's Red could easily have evaporated, considering he can melt steel, apparently. Just the fact that he was able to think that through gives you an insight into the kind of fighting that Araki expects of his characters. It's not just, like I was saying, kablam, quaza, whatever fucking sound effects. It's more specifically about what these characters choose to do in the world, which is why I keep saying this phrase over and over again. The stand is how you affect yourself into the world, into the environment. So this particular shot, beautifully animated, I think is a fundamental point of how stand battles are played out in JoJo for the rest of the series. So it's nice to see a little bit of a tease right here in the very first stand battle. And of course, I should probably mention the fucking poses are awesome as well. Star Platinum breaking out of the cell looks beautiful in the anime, looked beautiful in the manga. This frame with this awesome top-down camera angle, and Joseph revealing the true name of this evil spirit. A great dramatic reveal. Joseph's voice actor is so ham and so over the top. There's this particular moment later on in the cafe scene where he's yelling about Dio, and the thrill of his emotion is so palpable. It really brings that manga panel to life. I'm not sure if this is the voice actor who died recently, or if it was the voice actor for part 4, or if they're the same voice actor. I'm sorry, I don't really know that, but if it was him, then that's a real shame that he passed away. But with all that said, I see I'm approaching the hour-long mark, so I'm probably going to trim this down to about 25 minutes worth of content. I hope my stand rambling has entertained you guys. I hope this first episode of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders, I hope I've pieced it all together for you guys and made it as revealing as I could, and really got to the heart of why Stardust Crusaders is cool. Obviously, we've got 47 more episodes to go, and so this series should be a lot of fun to do. But with these fundamentals down about why stands are cool, why the Joestars are cool, about what other thematic elements we'll be excited to see in the rest of Stardust Crusaders, why we should be excited for the return of Dio, etc., etc., I hope to see you guys finally in the episode 2 Let's Watch or reaction or analysis or whatever I'm calling this. I still don't know what I'm calling this. I guess analyses will do as a general term. So yeah, stay mortal. Don't be jump scared by death. And today's JoJo quote of the day, I didn't do this for the last video, but that's because I'm recording them on the same day. The JoJo quote of the day, of course, is そのビジョンを名付けてスタンド